Right before the greatest transformation of your life, everything you know will collapse. Your relationships, your identity, your beliefs, all of it will shatter. And here is the terrifying part. This destruction is not a punishment, it is the prerequisite. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying why the human psyche must break before it rebuilds. He discovered a principle so disturbing that most people refuse to accept it. Collapse is the cure. He called it enantiodromia, the moment when everything in your life turns into its exact opposite. Your strength becomes weakness, your certainty becomes doubt, your identity becomes a stranger. And Jung said this is not a crisis, it is the doorway. Today, we are going to walk through that doorway together. We will explore why your psyche engineers its own destruction, why the dark night of the soul is not something that happens to you, but something that happens for you, and why the people who resist this collapse are the ones who never truly transform. As Jung himself warned, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. So if your life is falling apart right now, pay very close attention. The collapse begins. It always starts the same way. One morning you wake up and the life that used to feel meaningful suddenly feels hollow. The career you built feels like a prison. The relationship that once completed you now suffocates you. The beliefs that once anchored you now feel like chains. You have not changed. Your psyche has outgrown its container. Jung observed this pattern in thousands of patients. Somewhere between the ages of 35 and 50, something deep inside begins to revolt. The persona, that carefully constructed mask you wear for the world, starts cracking, and behind it, something raw and terrifying emerges. The person you thought you were begins to dissolve. Most people panic at this stage. They try to fix the marriage, change jobs, move cities, anything to restore the old order. But Jung warned that these are the wrong responses to the right crisis. The collapse is not the problem. The collapse is the invitation. As he wrote in his private journals, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires the death of who you pretended to be, and that death is exactly what the dark night of the soul delivers. But what actually triggers this psychological earthquake? Enantiodromia. Jung borrowed an ancient Greek concept and turned it into one of the most powerful ideas in psychology. Enantiodromia, the principle that everything at its extreme transforms into its opposite. Enantiodromia. Think about it, the person who controls everything eventually loses all control. The one who chases perfection creates chaos. The one who avoids all pain becomes consumed by suffering. Everything becomes its opposite. This is not philosophy, this is observable psychological law. Jung saw it in his patients, in history, in civilizations. When any attitude is held too rigidly, the unconscious builds up an equal and opposite force. And when that pressure becomes unbearable, it erupts. Your life does not fall apart randomly. It falls apart precisely because something inside you has been suppressed for too long. The loyal wife who suddenly leaves, the successful executive who has a breakdown, the devoted believer who loses all faith. These are not failures, they are the unconscious demanding to be heard. If this principle is making you rethink your own patterns right now, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because what comes next explains why your ego fights this process with everything it has. Ego's last stand. Your ego does not want to die, and make no mistake, that is exactly what the dark night of the soul demands. Ego must die first. The ego is the identity you have spent your entire life constructing. It is who you think you are, your titles, your achievements, your roles, your stories. Father, CEO, athlete, good person. Jung called the ego the center of consciousness. But here is the problem, the ego is not you. It is a fragment of you, a useful fragment. The part that navigates the social world, pays bills, maintains relationships. But when it becomes the only voice you listen to, it becomes a tyrant. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. During the dark night, the ego senses its own dissolution, and it fights back with everything it has. Anxiety, depression, rage, denial, addiction. Every defense mechanism fires at once. That panic attack at 3 in the morning, that is not weakness. That is your ego screaming because it knows it is losing control to something deeper, something more authentic, something it cannot comprehend. The resistance you feel is proportional to the transformation waiting on the other side. But what exactly is waiting on the other side? Shadow erupts. When the ego weakens, something ancient rises from the depths. Jung called it the shadow, every part of yourself that you have rejected, denied, or buried since childhood. During the dark night of the soul, the shadow does not politely knock, it kicks the door down. Suddenly you feel rage you did not know existed. Desires you thought you had conquered return with terrifying force. Memories you buried decades ago surface without warning. What you refuse to face in yourself will eventually confront you as your fate. This is why the dark night feels so terrifying. You are not just losing your external life, you are meeting every version of yourself you ever tried to destroy. The rage you swallowed as a child, the grief you never processed, the ambition you called selfish, the sexuality you called shameful. Every buried truth erupts. Jung insisted that the shadow is not evil, it is energy. Massive, raw, undifferentiated energy that has been locked away in the basement of your psyche, and during the dark night, that basement floods. The shadow contains not just your darkness, but your unlived potential. The question is not whether the shadow will emerge. The question is whether you will integrate it or be consumed by it. And that leads us to the most misunderstood part of this entire process. Death of meaning. There is a stage in the dark night of the soul that almost no one talks about. It is not the pain. It is not the fear. It is the absolute, crushing loss of meaning. Meaningless. Everything that once mattered, your goals, your values, your purpose, suddenly feels like a script written by someone else because it was. Your parents wrote some lines, society wrote others, your culture filled in the rest, and during the dark night you finally see the script for what it is. Borrowed meaning, inherited purpose, second-hand identity. The meaning of my existence is that life has addressed a question to me. This nihilistic void is not the destination, it is the clearing. Old meaning must be destroyed before authentic meaning can be born. Think of it like this: you cannot plant a garden in concrete. First, you must break up the foundation. The depression, the emptiness, the feeling that nothing matters, these are the jackhammers. Jung called this the negrito, the blackening stage of psychological alchemy, the rotting that precedes new growth. Every mystic, every philosopher, every transformative tradition has described this identical stage. And they all agree on one thing: you cannot skip it. But there is something specific that happens at the very bottom of this abyss. Rock bottom gift. At the absolute lowest point of the dark night, something extraordinary happens. You stop fighting. Surrender is the doorway. Not surrender as defeat, surrender as release. When you finally stop clinging to who you were, when you stop trying to reassemble the broken pieces of your old identity, profound silence emerges. Jung described this moment in his own dark night. Between 1913 and 1917, he experienced a complete psychological breakdown. Visions, voices, terror. His career nearly ended. His colleagues thought he had lost his mind. The father of analytical psychology was disintegrating. But in that dissolution, something else appeared. He began to encounter what he would later call the archetypes. Universal patterns that exist beneath all human consciousness. The wise old man, the great mother, the self. In my darkest moment, I found the foundation upon which my entire life's work would be built. His breakdown became his breakthrough. The Red Book, his private journal from this period, would become one of the most important psychological documents ever created. Your greatest wound contains the seed of your greatest gift. Rock bottom is not where you are destroyed. It is where you are finally stripped down to something real. And what emerges from this point is the process Jung considered the ultimate purpose of human existence: individuation. Jung gave a name to what happens after the dark night destroys everything false. He called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. Individuation. Not becoming perfect, not becoming happy, becoming whole. This is a critical distinction that most people miss. Individuation is not the elimination of darkness, it is the integration of it. Your shadow, your wounds, your contradictions, they are not removed, they are incorporated into a larger, more authentic self. 1. Accept what you previously denied. 2. Integrate what you previously rejected. 3. Embrace contradiction as completeness. 4. Let the self replace the ego as center. Before the dark night, you operated from the ego, a small, defended, partial self. After individuation, you begin operating from what Jung called the self, the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious unified. Ego to self-evolution. This does not mean your life suddenly becomes easy. It means your life suddenly becomes yours. Authentic choices replace reactive patterns. Genuine relationships replace codependent contracts. Real purpose replaces borrowed ambition. You do not become a new person. You become the person you always were beneath the masks. But individuation has a terrifying requirement that most people are not prepared for. Holding opposites. The dark night does not resolve into clarity, it resolves into paradox, and this is where most people get stuck. Hold the tension within. Jung taught that the mature psyche must learn to hold opposites simultaneously. You are both strong and vulnerable, both certain and doubtful, both light and shadow. The ego demands you choose one side, the self asks you to hold both. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. This is why transformation feels so disorienting. You are not moving from darkness to light, you are learning to contain both. Think about the people you most admire, the truly wise, the genuinely powerful. They carry a quality of depth that comes from having integrated their contradictions. They can be fierce and compassionate, confident and humble, playful and serious. This capacity to hold tension without collapsing into one extreme or the other. This is the real fruit of the dark night, not answers, not peace, but the ability to stand in the center of the storm and remain yourself. Wholeness is not the absence of conflict, but the capacity to contain it. And there is a reason why this transformation always arrives when it does. Midlife crisis. Jung believed the dark night of the soul is not random, it is developmental. It is programmed into the architecture of your psyche. The afternoon of life has a significance of its own and cannot be lived by the program of the morning. In the first half of life, your task is to build an ego, to establish identity, career, relationships, a place in the world. In the second half, your task reverses entirely. Now you must dismantle what you built and discover what lies beneath. What our culture calls a midlife crisis, Jung called the beginning of individuation. And he argued it is not a crisis at all. It is a calling. The problem is that modern society has no framework for this transition. We have no elders, no rituals, no ceremonies to mark the passage from ego building to soul building. No map for the soul. So when the dark night arrives, we pathologize it, we medicate it. We call it depression, anxiety, burnout. We treat the transformation as a disease to be cured. But Jung would argue that the real disease is never allowing the transformation to happen at all. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. The suffering has a purpose. The question is whether you will endure it consciously or unconsciously. And that brings us to the final, most important truth about this entire journey. Rebirth within. Here is the truth that Jung spent his entire life trying to communicate. The dark night of the soul is not a breakdown to be fixed. It is a breakthrough to be honored. Rebirth. Every great transformation in human history, personal and collective, has followed this exact pattern. Destruction, dissolution, and then something new, something that could never have existed without the collapse. You were never falling apart, you were falling into place. The caterpillar does not improve itself into a butterfly, it dissolves completely, literally liquefies inside the cocoon, and from that undifferentiated chaos, an entirely new form emerges. This is enantiodromia in its purest form, the death that is the birth, the collapse that is the creation, the darkness that is the light trying to emerge. Death becomes rebirth always. If you are in the dark night right now, if your life is falling apart, if nothing makes sense, if you feel lost in a way you cannot explain, know this: you are not broken, you are not weak, you are not failing. You are in the cocoon, and the liquefaction is exactly where you need to be. The only way out is through, and what waits on the other side is not a repaired version of your old self. It is someone you have never been before, someone whole. Jung understood that the dark night of the soul is not a punishment from the universe. It is an invitation from your own psyche, a demand to stop living a half-life and finally become complete. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Enantiodromia is not something to fear. It is the most honest force in your psychological life. The moment when the unconscious says enough. Enough pretending, enough performing, enough living someone else's script. Enough pretending, start becoming. The breakdown was never the enemy. It was the doorway you were too afraid to walk through. And now you know, every great transformation requires a great dissolution first. If you made it this far, comment enantiodromia if you recognized this pattern in your own life. That word is your proof that you understand what most people never will. That falling apart is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this gave you something to reflect on, hit subscribe and share this with someone going through their own dark night.